Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a privilege to ask a question here in the House of Commons to continue a debate that on December 7th I asked a question to the Minister of Transportation, Communities and Services. I wanted to find out from the Minister the position of this government on public versus private ownership of the Windsor-Detroit border. For those that are not aware, this is the busiest international trade corridor in North America, Mr. Speaker, and it's one that has significant impact upon the economy. One of the things that have come out recently, Mr. Speaker, is that the Citigroup, a financial institution that is hardly what anyone could suggest is a left-leaning think tank, actually did a study on public versus private ownership of international bridges and tunnels. And from that, Mr. Speaker, they measured several different factors. They looked at the interest rates, they looked at equity, they looked at corporate income tax, they looked at sales tax, and the result of all those types of analysis was that private ownership was going to have a 35 to 40% increase in toll rates from the private ownership versus the public one. Now, what's interesting to know, Mr. Speaker, is that this area that we're talking about, Windsor and the surrounding area, has 4 border crossings right now, and there's a mixture of different ownership. And one of the one that's privately held actually has one of the most significantly higher tolls than even the competitors, say, for example, in Sault Ste. Marie, Sarnia, Fort Erie, Buffalo, and also in the region. So the concern as we move forward to a brand new border crossing in my region is one that's going to be publicly owned and operated, one that's going to ensure that there's going to be the lowest fares possible to add increased competition, but also, Mr. Speaker, is not to tax the users too much. We all know about the manufacturing issues that are in Ontario right now, the concern about them being able to compete fairly with international trade agreements certainly being brought into line that are very concerning to manufacturing, but also, too, is that the current business that we have there, not adding this additional tax and burden on the operators. So my question to the government and to the parliamentary secretary who is here today is to get a commitment from his government that the next bridge crossing between Windsor and Detroit is going to be one publicly owned and operated, similar to the other ones that are being built across this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I can assure this member that we are going to do what's in the best interest of Canadians and Canadian taxpayers, as well as residents in the Windsor area. This gateway, Mr. Speaker, is essential to Canada, and we know it is very important to Canada, as it is, as the member has mentioned, the busiest border crossing. It is absolutely essential to not only our trade, but our continued economic success and security. The government is working right now with binational partners, such as the United States federal government, the state of Michigan, and of course the province of Ontario, where it's situated. And we're going to work with them to develop a solution that ensures that sufficient capacity across the Detroit River to facilitate cross-border trade and traffic continues and, in fact, enhances. As part of this work, we are conducting our due diligence, Mr. Speaker, a comprehensive and harmonized environmental assessment, and I'm sure the member would encourage that environmental assessment to identify the locations of the bridge crossing, inspection plazas, and the access roads. As well, we are also assessing possible models for delivery of the new crossing because, as I said, Mr. Speaker, we want to do what's in the best interest of the Canadian taxpayer, who is ultimately all of our bosses. Private sector participation, such as the public-private partnership, is one of the models that is being considered. In November, the Minister of Transport, Infrastructure and Communities actually stated at the Public-Private Partnership Conference in Toronto that this government is exploring the opportunities for using a private-public partnership for financing, for building, for operating and maintaining the new crossing between Windsor and Detroit. This is just one of several options. I want to be clear with the member, one of several options, because we do act in the best interest on this side of the House of the Canadian taxpayers. No decision has been made as of yet, and this can deliver new infrastructure more efficiently and more expeditiously, Mr. Speaker. Although the government can borrow at a lower rate, which is one of the considerations that this member has brought forward, than the private sector, financing is only one of the many possible considerations that we have to look at before making this decision. The costs of private sector borrowing would be offset by the risk that the private sector takes and by increased innovation and efficiency that this member would have to agree, I would suggest, that the private sector can bring to occasional projects from time to time. We still have appropriate and effective public oversight by the federal government. More specifically, Mr. Speaker, C3, which was one of the main initial pieces of legislation that this Conservative government put forward, we have now received royal assent as of February 1st, 2007, and that will ensure no matter what model that this government picks, that it will be the model that we will have governance over our international bridges and tunnel for the best interest of Canadians. This Conservative government will also ensure that the operator would put in place mechanisms to address community concerns. Mr. Speaker, let me assure you that this government is committed, absolutely committed, to selecting the delivery option that provides the greatest value for taxpayers while maintaining appropriate public oversight of the new crossing. It is, quite frankly, a balance, Mr. Speaker, a balance for the best interest of Canadians. This government will continue to work with the binational partnership, all of our partners, listen to stakeholders, to explore models for delivering the new crossing that is in the best interest of Canadians. If such a model cannot meet the objectives of the Government of Canada or its United States partner, alternative delivery mechanisms will be pursued. Mr. Speaker, the Windsor-Detroit Gateway is a matter of national, I repeat, national priority, and this government remains committed to ensuring that a new crossing will be in place by 2013, but we will do so, Mr. Speaker, in the best interest of Canadian taxpayers, the residents, and all stakeholders.
The honourable member for Windsor West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. But given the importance of this infrastructure in the future of our country, it's a slam dunk in terms of moving towards public accountability and ownership. And, Mr. Speaker, I have done parliamentary research this in the past, and what has come to its conclusion when examining public versus private ownership is shown that public ownership, you have direct control over access, safety, quality, and pricing. Very important for national security issues, Mr. Speaker. Second to that, Mr. Speaker, I would point out that I'm concerned about the way this government is operating and moving towards American style towards privatization of their highway system, which has increased tolls. And what ends up happening, Mr. Speaker, is that you get investment bankers, Australian and Spanish builders, say, for example, in the United States, that have taken advantage of the public assets and are actually making huge profits at the expense of ordinary citizens. And now they're starting a backlash because they've gone too far down that road. So what I want to hear from this government is whether they're actually going to support the call for public ownership. Recently now, the province of Ontario has actually now joined the cause. It was interesting in the minister's response to me. He had mentioned about the provincial government, and right now, actually, given the last couple of days, the provincial government has said, quote, the Ontario government is urging Ottawa to steer clear of private ownership of the next Windsor-Detroit border crossing, the province's public infrastructure minister David Kaplan said Friday, and that was in the Windsor Star. So once again, I'd call for the importance of this in public ownership and get on to moving the next crossing and avoid lawsuits, Mr. Speaker. That's going to happen if we actually have public